That was some drama. I have my drawing pad, and the pen was on top of the thing. So when I tried to move my mouse, it kept jumping back to the pen, and I couldn't get us on the screen. It was tragic.
These are the dramas of
Coffee
life.
class almost died. Rip.
While we're talking about drama.
Yeah. So welcome to Coffee Class with Young Screenwriters. I'm Alexie, and that is Adam. And today we are talking about the monster of Act 2, where screenwriters go to die. Not really, hopefully. But it's one of the most challenging
screenwriters go to be vexed and frustrated and give up on their stories.
Yes. And that happens in basically all cases. So we're going to talk through how you get through that mess, how you get through that that part of your movie, which is actually
what is Act 2 and why is it hard? Like, why is it hard? What is the deal?
So Act 2 is all about the protagonist trying to get their objective, right? It's completely focused on the protagonist has their objective, they know what it is, and now they need to go get it. And that is the entirety of Act 2, because we start when they commit to this objective at the Act 1 break or call to action, and we end at the ultimate test, where they come face to face with their objective, and their flaw makes them lose and leads them into a low.
From a macro perspective, it's the part of the story where we see the conflict play out, right? You could define that as, well, the protagonist has an objective and they have obstacles, therefore conflict. But, you've set up your story. You've got your beginning. This is the middle. This is the part where stakes are raised, where themes are explored, where characters are tried, tested and try their best to, get what they want and maybe fail. And it sets up the end, right? So like, there's so much about like the promise of what the story is has to be proven in Act 2. And also, it's like the part of your, like if you have a movie, all of the best bits from the trailer are in Act 2. All of the moments that you really remember may not be there, but it's the glue that keeps the movie together and justifies its existence. And it's hard for people, like a lot of people give up right around halfway through their movie because they set up the character, they set up the story, but they don't necessarily know how to accelerate in a way where they can stick the landing, right? And things come apart. Like the joke is anyone can write the first 30 pages of a screenplay, but then they can sort of get to this point where like, well, they lose energy. Characters sort of seem a little bit more like meandering, maybe like a plot line you thought was enough material for a movie you start to realize, oh, I had enough material for a short film or for a pilot. Like it's very tricky because there's the stuff you were talking about, Alexie, about like sort of like, well, there's the ingredients of like, okay, it's a character objective, like that's the fix, right?
Yeah.
But in terms of addressing the problem is always, oh, it got less interesting, or oh, I didn't know what to do next, or oh, the characters seemed kind of stuck. It's like, even if you have your ending, it's kind of like frustrating to be in that situation where you're like, oh, I set up, but I don't know how to connect the promise of what I was excited about, that seed of excitement of like, oh, these are the characters, this is the situation, to something that's satisfying.
Right. John always says that when he is, at the dentist and the dentist has got their tools in his mouth and corners him about their screenplay that they're working on, they're like, I'm writing a screenplay, but I got stuck. And John's like, page 60, 65. And every single time that is correct, because, if the Act 2 is the most exciting part in a lot of ways, because that is most of your movie, but it's also the most difficult. And I think that we have some strategies that we're going to talk about for helping you figure out what to do in Act 2. I would say that one of the biggest problems that happens in Act 2, going into it, is that people connect events with and then instead of but therefore. So you have a lot of these things that maybe you've imagined. You have a lot of these obstacles, like you know that you're going to be trying to get the gem from inside the temple, and now you're going to run through, but there's all these traps that you think are really cool that your character is going to have to try to overcome. So you just write these scenes of them trying to overcome traps, and basically they become little tiny things you can pick up, move it, drop it anywhere, and it doesn't change much. It's just, obstacle, obstacle, obstacle. And when that happens, it becomes hard to figure out, okay, I've done all of my traps and I'm still like 30 pages short. Do I make them longer? And the issue is that a lot of the times it's not connected. Everything is just and then. When we start looking into the idea of but therefore, you get a causality that can help you to decide which event goes where, why this event must happen before the other one, what exactly is escalating. And it helps give you momentum towards the objective. Adam, do you want to explain but therefore a little more?
Yeah, and it's kind of like you said, it's a clear line of causality, but it's when it's working, it's directed by a character's agency, right? Like the character we meet in the beginning of the story, who oh, this is this person, this is their problem, this is why we care. You've established all that, and this is kind of like the thing that disrupts their status quo in life and sets them on the path of the story. Once they're on the path of the story, beginning of Act 2, connecting it with but or therefore, connecting the events and the scenes they make with but therefore is only as useful as it's directed and motivated by the choices they're making, right? Like you could have a really dull, lifeless story with a but therefore dynamic of like Bob went to the supermarket, but his car broke down. Therefore, he called his friend to pick him up, but his friend wasn't around. Therefore, he had to call his mother, who he didn't want to call. But his mother, whatever. Like you can sequence events with a line of conflict and causality, but it's not necessarily connected to choice. The trick is to make your character in the driver's seat, active protagonist instead of a passive protagonist, while that dynamic's happening. And that's why we have a lot of plots where you have a sequence of events, you have like a plot that's moving forward, but the character's just sort of reacting to things. They're like, so it's kind of like these two things at play. You want to have your character just be the agent of change in their story, be the most pivotal and compelling character to follow, while also having events structured in an order that is like, there's conflict, like there are problems. They try to do something, but it doesn't work out. Therefore, they try something else, but there's an unexpected development. And varying this, you don't want to think of it as a very static way, because you want the problems to be of a different nature, right? Like sometimes the but isn't necessarily their plan didn't work out. It can be, but the but in the but therefore can also be, but it works too well in ways they didn't expect. Right? Like the therefore can be a positive or negative consequence. What it has to be, though, it has to be something that is surprising to the audience and engaging to them while testing the character. I'm rambling, but I think just putting it into two buckets, of really useful things: the active protagonist who's doing everything in their power to achieve their singular tangible objective.
Yeah.
And a line of causality, but therefore, connecting scenes, again, in an escalating shape where problems are getting larger, where the stakes raise, right? It's like all three of those things all the three of those puzzle pieces have to work together to make a plot kind of invisible and magical to audiences. Because the moment you have a series of episodic events, you could have that be but therefore, and the character going after what they're going after, but they could be the same type of problem. Well, they rob a bank, and then they rob a car, and then they it could be the same type of problem where the audience will then get sort of numb to whatever that type of event is. To keep surprising people and to keep people at the edge of their seats, keep people invested, you got to be changing the nature of their problems. You have a bunch of extra, if you have 60 pages of car chases and explosions, but no emotional drama or conflict whatsoever, right? It's, you want to have variety in there, and it's a variety that's like testing the people. Like, so I had said 2 buckets, but there are 3 really. There's the but therefore line of causality, where you've motivated a sequence of events that are surprising. And there's the active protagonist who's doing everything they can to achieve their singular objective. Yeah, it's all, and then the escalating nature of problems. And it also, that doesn't mean a bigger plane or a bigger car chase, though it can. It means the stakes being raised for the characters, right? Like, and usually the midpoint of a story, the halfway point of Act 2, is the shift in dynamic of like, okay, we had car chases in the first half of Act 2, and the second half is, now that, like, what do they do? Like, oh, they're captured and they have to deal with their emotional trauma with their family, right?
Right.
Like, 2 very different types of problems that will shift the audience, if they're on the ride, into a sort of surprising space. Like, they got used to the car crashes. Now they want a different type of problem. If that makes sense.
5, Act 2. Look at that. Is that dramatic enough?
Yeah, there you go. I love the yeah, center that.
There we go.
I rambled for a long time there.
No, it was good. So I think that one of the things that I want to point out about the escalating nature of obstacles is that, it's about testing the flaw, isn't it? So it's like,
yes.
Hang on 1 second. This is going to drive me nuts if I don't fix it right now. Haha, I fixed it right now. Okay. The escalating nature of objectives. Everything is about testing this flaw, because, your story is about change, and the change happens as a result of your protagonist being tested as they push towards their objective. And the change is going to happen in them overcoming their flaw and achieving their inner need, right? So usually what happens is you have a character who's digging deeper into their flaw all the way up to the ultimate test, and then they fail because of it. They fail because they're digging into their flaw. And again, I think it's worth reiterating that we talk about flaw and inner need with absolutely no like positive or negative connotation. In an anti-hero movie, the flaw can be something that we consider morally good, like, that he cares about other people before themselves, or like, they have a good work-life balance. And then the inner need can be dedicate everything to drums, or it can be like I only look out for myself. It can be positive to negative, or negative to positive, or however you want to do it. But generally, your flaws you're getting tested and digging into that flaw until you reach an ultimate test, and that's like the final fail of your flaw, right?
Yeah. Or at the moment where the character realizes that they have to change.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to answer this question. This is a good one. Does the protagonist always have to be active for the whole of Act 2? Are there exceptions, such as things happen to the character rather than being active throughout the whole act? So this can be kind of a semantic definition thing. But so characters can have like deal with consequences of their actions. They can deal with things not working out, right? It's not like every single moment to moment, every single moment of Act 2, they have to be like constantly like initiating choices. That's not what I'm saying. But they have to be the agent of change in the story, right? Like, they have to be pushing forward. Yeah, they could have setbacks and where it's like, oh my God, things happen to them. But those things are usually more powerful when they're consequences of choices they've made. Right. And also, like, this isn't like a hard science, like there's wiggle room. Like, it's just a general sense of like audience being invested in a person and caring about what's going to happen to them, if it ever feels like it's not their story, that's when things get messed up. Like if another character starts making all the choices and starts like pushing the character, and the protagonist just sort of gets dragged along, it's not their story anymore. And the protagonist has to be the agent of change in their story for it to be their story. And also just for us to give a shit. Sorry, swearing. But I think generally speaking, in terms of like macro big things that happen to the protagonist passively, the inciting incident is classically, in the platonic ideal of a screenplay, the inciting incident is the singular thing that happens to them. And from that point on, they are making choices to react to the inciting incident. So if you look at a story at a really macro level, like the thing that sets them on the journey is the thing that happens to them. And from then on, they're the agent of change in the story. But of course, there's variation. And there are moments where like, oh, they tried to defuse the bomb. And then a consequence of that bomb, you know, like it blew off their arm. Oh God, lost my arm, you know. But it would be different than if like that was a thing that had nothing to do with their choices from before.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
No. Yeah, for sure. I think that Carl keeps messaging me. And it's very distracting, Carlos. But, you know, I think that yes, and also you want to remember that the best antagonists are also active towards their own objective. Yes. And their objective is going to be mutually exclusive with the protagonist's objective almost always, unless they're like a false mentor antagonist combo and it's an anti-hero. Well, no, that's not true. Anyway, in general, the antagonist has their own objective that is mutually exclusive with the protagonist's objective. And so they are also going to be making choices that the protagonist has to react to. The important thing is that they're kind of building off of each other, right? That the world is reacting to the protagonist being in it, and therefore more consequences are arising, and like more, the antagonist is trying bigger things. The antagonist doesn't like that they're getting closer to the super gem, so now they're going to put in more robots. I don't know what movie I'm talking about. But you see what I mean? It's like you want both of them to be active. And the antagonist is the protagonist of their own story, so they're also making choices in the ideal situation. But it's all a result of, in a lot of ways, it's a result of the protagonist disrupting the world.
And just to add on to that, like, you know, if you're coming into this and you're looking at all these jargony terms, so like antagonist, normal world, you know, like inciting, like that, it is jargon to understand like a system, right? And the system we're talking about inside a tentpole document. You go inside a tentpole document, you're looking at a system to create drama and to construct plots motivated to character, right? But outside of that, you have to ask, like, well, what is the purpose of this system, right? The purpose of the system is to engage people with a good story that's connected to character that they care about, right? And like when Alexie's talking about, okay, the antagonist is the hero of their own story, and they have to be active too. Well, why is that? Because it's more interesting, right? It's more dynamic, right? It creates more conflict. If you have one great character with a compelling inner life that's really active and going after what they want in a way that creates compelling drama, it's more interesting if you have another character who's just as compelling and contrasts them and pushes back, because then like it's the push and pull that creates like the magic trick of people wanting to know what happens next and it not feeling constructed.
We talk about this. We've talked about this numerous times, but I guess it's worth saying again for anybody who hasn't heard it before. You know, screenplay structure is not meant to be prescriptive. It is descriptive. I think I got that right.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, cool. Just making sure of an organic storytelling process that exists in basically like all forms of storytelling that we have. It's just that when you're trying to put story into a 90-minute to 2-hour window, there's a natural shape that it tends to take. And this exists, whether we it exists, and there's a bunch of different ways that people have tried to describe what happens. And so our approach is just describing generally the things that we see happening in stories that work. It's not meant to be like this is the golden law, the rule of forever and ever. It's more just, a lot of people have thought about this, and these are the things that this is the shape of the story takes in most cases when you put a story into 90 minutes to 2 hours. I think now would be a good time to kind of talk about other things that are happening in Act 2 to help you decide what it is, what's going on. Because, it's the Act 1 is almost the easiest one to write because there's so many beats that have to happen in a short amount of time. So in a way, it's like, you have to introduce the world. So I know I'm going to spend a couple pages seeing my protagonist in the ordinary world doing something related to their flaw and clearly missing some inner need, right? So that's going to take up like 5 pages. I know I'm going to have an inciting incident happen to them that's going to completely turn their life upside down. I know that this is going to be something that is going to, present something that they should do or must do, something that needs to be fixed or solved or achieved. It creates a problem for the protagonist. Almost always there's a moment where the protagonist doesn't want to do this because it's clearly going to be a freaking nightmare. It's clearly going to be a lot of effort. It's going to be a long journey, but in the end, something pushes them to go ahead and accept this challenge. And then that gets us into Act 2. And that's like 15, 20 pages into your film. So that's a lot to accomplish in a short amount of time.
And just can I add in one thing? Mm-hmm. So, like, those are all the nuts and bolts of like, well, how you construct an Act 1. But if you ask yourself really why those things are happening, it's introduce, oh, who's this about? And why do I give a shit?
Mm-hmm.
And what happens to them? Why do I want to follow them? Like the moment you were describing of like, it's in Joseph Campbell's Hero's Myth, it's rejecting the call to adventure of the inciting incident, right? Like, but like what you were saying is like, there's a moment where they don't want to. Well, why? Why do people do that? Is it just arbitrary? No, it's to sort of set up in the audience's mind what the promise of the story is and why, and that it's going to be difficult. That's worth following them around for, right? If they immediately try to solve the problem, oftentimes it creates this effect of like, oh, it's not that hard. They'll figure it out. If you want to create drama, you want to make the protagonist seem unprepared for the journey because that's just more dramatic. And why do things have to be more dramatic? It's just more interesting to watch a story about somebody who isn't equipped to deal with something. I don't know, or has some limitation to them. So it's setting up who's this about, why should we care, what's holding them back that's going to make this interesting.
Right. And it's, stories are about change. So in order for someone to change, you're going to have to test them. And so basically that moment, that beat is showing, okay, they have some quality that is going to be tough to overcome. It's usually a moment for like the flaw to shine and to, get in the way first. But yeah. And then, so that part, it's 20 pages. It's pretty short. It's a lot of stuff that has to happen. Boom, boom, boom. And then now you get into Act 2. And Act 2 is about, how many pages is it by itself? Like 60 to 65 pages by itself. And it is the bulk of your movie. And there's some things that are important to have happen there. And we can talk about each one and why. But one of the most notable things that I think is the most interesting is your new world. When the protagonist accepts the call at the end of Act 1, right? They decide to commit to their objective because of whatever reason they have to. They move into a new world. It doesn't have to literally be like a brand new alien planet. It can be, but this is area where they're going to have their flaw tested. It doesn't even have to actually be a physical change in space. It can be something like, you know, in Election, I think her new world is that she's now running a political campaign. Reese
She's not the
Witherspoon.
protagonist.
She's not the protagonist of Election?
Nope. No, it's
Why?
Matthew Broderick's character. He's the point of view character, and he's the one with the voiceover, and we follow his problem. She's the antagonist.
Oh, well.
It's okay. Sorry, I'm being a dick.
No, it's okay. I don't know. I don't remember that movie, honestly, but I was thinking about things that can stay in one place, you know? In Juno, I will talk about something I do know. In Juno, it's that she decides that she is going to keep her baby and needs to get the baby placed with a family. So then her new world is being pregnant. You know, she's not literally changed her space, but it's this new world of pregnancy and trying to find an adoptive family to take her baby. So the new world is the thing that should be most, like, the space that should be most interesting to you. You know, if you're gonna write Harry Potter, then you want the new world to be all of the magic and the school and Hogwarts and all of these like magical things happening, because that's the most exciting part of the world. If we stayed in non-magic land well into Act 2, that'd be super, super boring. But you know, it's the space that you're going to spend the most time in, and it's it should be your favorite part.
Another way of thinking about it is New World is the hook of your movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's the dynamic environment that is like the promise of the movie trailer. It's the interesting idea of like why people would want to watch this in the first place. You've got a zombie movie. This is the part where the zombies are doing shit.
Yep. This is where the rubber hits the road. This is going to be, you know, Ash gets his Pokemon, and now he starts his adventure leaving Pallet Town. Him and Pikachu. His new world is the wide world of Pokemon. I had to get Pokemon in there.
Go for it.
Thank you. But yeah, so that's the new world. Another one I want to hit next is really important, and is actually, when you think about it this way, makes Act 2 a little bit less difficult, because you give yourself a checkpoint halfway through the desert, right? The midpoint, which, if we're being technical, is not the middle of your movie. It is the middle of Act 2. So just something to keep in mind. It normally happens a little bit later than halfway through your movie. So like out of 110-page script, 100-page script, it's happening on page 60, 65, right at the midpoint, which is also where people run out of steam, which is why the midpoint is so helpful for thinking about how to get through Act 2. Adam, do you want to talk about midpoint and what that is a little bit?
It's the there are lots of people define it a lot of ways, but functionally what it is, it's a dynamic shift of the nature of the problem, right? So if you've been, here's a good example. Classic Star Wars, New Hope, they're trying to get to Alderaan they're trying to get to the Rebel base with the droids. They're dodging, they had difficulty getting a ship. All these stormtroopers are chasing them. You know, they're on route. They get stuck trapped. All these. They have difficulty getting there. They get to on the way to. They arrive at their coordinates, and guess what? There is no Alderaan. The place they thought they were going to go got blown up, and they get trapped in the center of the Death Star. They're trapped. Right. It's a fundamental nature of the problem. Not only the place they thought they were going no longer exists, but they're trapped in the belly of the beast, in the main base that they were owned by the people they're trying to run away from, right? Like, so the problem goes not just, we need to escape the Empire and get to the Rebel base on Alderaan. It's we need to get the fuck out of here, and the stakes are higher too, right? So it's the nature of the problem. The objective is the same, but the nature of the problem has changed, right? So like the nature of the challenges. right? So they still need to get those droids to the rebel base, but now they need to escape the center of the Death Star and get the tractor beam. Like the obstacles are at a higher stakes than the first half of Act Two.
Right.
It, and the midpoint is the moment where we accelerate. It could be a twist. It could be in Parasite. It's the moment you realize the old housekeeper's husband is in the basement, and it's a whole new nature of the problem. Like they have to deal with, this sort of new violent competition with somebody of the same class as them who used to work for the Park family. Like it's always a big deal. It's always something that changes the nature of the problem. It's something that accelerates the emotional stakes of the story. Like bad Act Twos don't use the midpoint well, because the second half of the act, all the events after the midpoint have to feel more intense and dramatic than the more moments before. If it's the same level of drama, if you've used the most dramatic situation to hook people in the beginning of Act Two, you've nowhere to go. You've lost like the dynamic rhythm of it, right? You've entered a new world. Things are exciting. Oh, wow, look at all this. Oh fuck. The oh fuck is what keeps things interesting. It's sort of the halfway point that gives you new life and new energy to get to the end. And I think a lot of people probably miss that. And also, you could have a big twist or a big moment, but if your protagonist isn't in control of their story, if they're not active, the midpoint could feel like it was happening to somebody else. Like there's so many things that could go wrong here. And this is why it's hard. You got to really construct it in a way where it works. Yeah, is that good?
Yeah, no, for sure. Let me see. I'm trying to pull up an example that we have. So this was a tentpole doc for the let's see. Actually, is this a good example? I was gonna pull up Grand Budapest Hotel that we have.
That's not a good one.
Let's see. Train to Busan might be good.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Okay. Here we go. So this is Train to Busan. And it's a little long, but the thing I want to talk about here is that a lot of times people have the tendency to, or writers have the tendency, and I do it all the time, and that's why I have to tell out of my stories so I don't get stuck not fixing it, is that they think that the ultimate test that they have in their early drafts is the biggest possible challenge that their protagonist could face, and that there's no possible way that they could go forward, and the script has to end there. And as writers, we want to challenge ourselves, not every single time, sometimes you might have the right one, but to ask, what if I put the big low point in the middle, right? What if I made that my midpoint? And I think that this is a really good example of that, where basically,
well, the all is lost is pretty bad in this movie too, but
well, I'm talking about like early on. Like say you're early on and you have like this guy and his daughter and you're going through the train, and your goal, right, is, I think it's just to get out safe, like escape.
What's to get to Busan? It's get to Busan.
Yeah. Get to Busan with your daughter, right? Yep. And so you might think when you're originally planning this movie, the worst thing that can happen to this man is that he's separated from his daughter, right? There's hordes of zombies between him and his daughter, and they are completely separated. And then that is the point where he really has to, all that makes everything so much harder. And that's what he has to rise up and overcome. And that's it. That's my movie, right? He breaks through, gets the daughter back, done. It's worth asking yourself, what if I made that the midpoint and forced my protagonist to continue? Right? What would my movie become then? And so in this case, they did put that the dad and the daughter are separated at the midpoint. And honestly, like, probably if you were making that change as you were making your own tentpole document, a lot of times your first thought is, well, you can't go on from, like, you can't have more movie after that. It's like there's no way to overcome it. And that's exactly where interesting stories are, where you as the writer think it's impossible, and then you have to try to come up with a way for them to push forward anyway. Um, a lot of times, the midpoint is a death of a mentor character or someone who's really important to the protagonist. Um, Someone's taken away. Basically, the idea is that when you go into the new world at the beginning of Act 2, you don't understand the rules of this new land and you're figuring out, you're getting your bearings. Leading up to the midpoint, you're making good progress. You almost got a grip on things, and then something happens, there's a twist, and now all the rules are changed. And you have to basically start again from ground zero. And that's what they do here in the Train to Busan, where they separate dad and the daughter. At first, the whole thing was, me with my daughter trying to get through this, and then now he has to get her back. Yeah.
And it creates a dynamic of like the nature of the problem is even so much worse. They're all probably going to die from zombies, but he's got to get to the front of the train through all of these cars of zombies with just this small group of guys. Like it's so powerful because we went so far in like showing in the first half of Act 2 how dangerous these things were, how the whole, how fast it spreads from one person to another. Like we understand the rules of how dangerous this new world is, and it's possibly the worst thing that could have happened to him, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's the worst thing that could happen, and it's a challenge that feels substantial, right? Like the stakes are raised. It's like, oh fuck, I want to see them. Like, what's going to happen next? Like it's kind of like a characters trapped in a corner moment, and the fun of the movie is watching how they do it.
Yeah. Whatever your midpoint is, you as the writer should have to sit there for a second and be like, they can't go on from that. I can't write another 30 pages after this point. And then you go, well, how would they try to push through this? That is where you start surprising your audience and getting some really interesting stuff going on. Because a lot of times the ultimate test of the movie that you end up with is somewhat predictable, right? They either get their objective, they get to the point where they get their objective or they don't, right? And a lot of times it's pretty predictable. If he's moving through the train car at the beginning and we know he needs to get to Busan, then at the ultimate test, he comes face to face with that. He either gets to Busan or he doesn't, right? In general, that is how that goes at the ultimate test. So if you can, I forget where I was going, but anyway.
No, it's
midpoints.
Midpoints are it's arguably one of the most important beats in the movie. But a thing I'll bring up is a lot of people. This is a less sexy, less popular point to bring up, but a lot of people's stories die in Act 2 because the concept of the movie wasn't really thought out. Yeah, like you realize you've run out of story is another reason. Mm-hmm. And stories that can pivot on a midpoint and go deeper typically have conceptual depth and strength to them. Like, think about it this way. You can have one maybe character dynamic you're interested in. You have like one setting or idea that you want to explore. That's usually not enough to sustain the movie. You need two dynamics that play off of each other, right? Like it's one thing to sort of say like, okay, zombies on a train, but then there's the father-daughter story. He's disconnected from her, right? There's like and the all of the people on the train, the nature of the problems they give. Like there's a really terrible movie, hypothetically, out of the same concept of Train to Busan, right? Or could have just been like, okay, zombies, and they need to get across the country, rather than without the whole train aspect. Like the train is part of the hook. Like what is the worst place you would want to be in a zombie invasion? In a place where you were trapped. They're trapped on the train because everywhere around them is swarmed with zombies. Those destination, like the fact that the zombies can move so fast in train cars, the actual setting is part of the concept and dynamic, right? You could take that exact same set of characters and put them on a boat or put them on a like, and it wouldn't have been as good. Or they have to, or they're it's like the two things,
Yep.
zombie invasion, but like what is the second twist? It could be an interpersonal character thing, like I said, the father-daughter story. But like usually it's a great movie is actually like 100 great ideas all stacked on top of each other.
Yep.
And they're all internally consistent, right? And that starts with some sort of strong scenarios, right? Like, and I think some people think very statically in terms of like the concept of the movie. Like the first thing I thought of is the movie, and then they get trapped when they run out of story, where they only had like really maybe a notion or a sense of character, or they had the wrong character for the notional story they had. And so much of making Act Two actually work is having a concept that works.
Yeah. I want to share a thought about this that I think is kind of a good example. And they did make it into a movie. And honestly, I don't know if it started as a movie, but it was a horror story that I heard at a sleepover when I was little, which is, it's the, babysitter goes to a house and there's a bunch of kids and she's watching the kids. The parents are gone. The parents are gone for the weekend, not going to be back for a while. And all of a sudden she starts getting calls, and it's like a really creepy, like breathy voice being like I'm watching you type thing, right? But it's especially creepy because the voice is like naming things that she's doing, like, man, like you should, like, I don't know, you left the fridge a little cracked or something, just like really creepy things to this babysitter who's watching these kids, and saying ominous things about the children and about her. And the babysitter gets super freaked out. She goes around, she locks all the doors, makes sure that it's safe. She keeps getting these calls, right? And they keep getting scarier and scarier and scarier. And she eventually ends up, barricading the doors. She's like huddling with the kid, like she's getting the kids, trying to, she has to survive this. And she decides she's going to call the police. And she calls the police, and they said, okay, we'll put a tracker on it next time he calls you. And they do. And they say something super like, you called the police, I told you not to do that, blah, blah, blah. And then the police call her back and they say, you have to get out of there. The call is coming from inside the house. Right? So the baddie has been inside the house the whole time. And that always freaking scarred me. And then I think that's it, Spencer. They did make a movie out of it. Or maybe it started as a movie. Anyway, horror story to me. So that's where the horror story ends, is they say the call is coming from inside the house. And you go, they're all dead. And then you go to sleep, or don't sleep, because now you're going to have nightmares. But if you were going to make this into a movie based on that, then you would probably start with the calls coming from inside the house at the ultimate test. That would probably be the natural thing where you would start, right? Just kind of mapping it out as it is. And so then you have to have the babysitter fight this person and win or don't win, and then you're done. This would be a classic case of, what if you moved the ultimate test to the midpoint, right? So what if the police say the call is coming from inside of the house at the midpoint instead of the ultimate test? And your initial thought is like, well, there's no way. Like that's when she fights this person. That's when it's done, right? But then you start thinking like, well, if not, what is she going to have to do to stay safe in this situation now, right? To try to keep herself and the kids safe. What is she going to have to do? Is she going to start, now is her only choice to fight back against this guy? Like, what is that how the dynamic is going to change now that she's stuck in here? It's not about defense anymore. Now she's got to think about, offense. And changing the dynamics a bit. And I think that to me is just kind of an illustration of how you can make a story much more interesting by taking what you believe to be the worst thing that could possibly happen and putting it at the middle, and then saying, okay, if I really had to push, if I really had to go on, how would you go on? Right? So Yeah, it is a scary story. Sorry for anybody who's hearing it for the first time. It creeped me out. But I hope that that kind of, I hope that that kind of helps to explain this concept that I'm talking about, where a lot of times what you think is the worst, you can put it in the middle and really amp up the excitement and, what's interesting about your story. Because isn't it much more interesting if now for the rest of the movie, this babysitter is like going on the offense trying to figure this out? I personally think that's much more interesting. But yeah.
It's kind of like, you know, storytelling is always about seizing surprise and creating surprise in the audience, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
because that's how you get them to have that, the question, the ultimate magic trick question of what happens next. I want to know what happens next. And if you preemptively sort of make the things they fear and fear will happen as early as possible, the question is like, where the fuck is this going to go from here, right? Something like that. Like if you put that big reveal really early in the story, or early enough where it feels patterned to the rhythm of the story you're telling, you're more likely to create an environment like it where sort of anything can happen. Like the situation opens up in a way that's dramatic and compelling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so in this case, a midpoint always leads to a new world, because when you go into the act 2, it's a new world. Now we're going to change the rules again. They're basically at ground zero within the new rules of this. So in my horrible babysitter story, now at first she thought the world was, I'm babysitting these kids inside this house and I got to keep us all safe in these bounds. And then she gets to the point where, going up to the midpoint, she's like, I have completely protected us, right? I'm good. Then she gets this call. Now he's inside the house. That is a completely new world. The threat has completely changed. And that dynamic puts her back at ground zero. And that, I think, is something that is really interesting about Act 2. And also helps when you're stuck at page 65, which is exactly the midpoint. That's what you need. Something that's going to completely change the rules.
And raise the stakes.
And raise the stakes. That's much
Yes.
that's much worse.
Call coming from inside the house. Oh.
Yeah. Hashtag
Also,
whoops.
oh my God, my daughter's in the first car and I'm in the last car and we're surrounded by like 5 cars full of zombies. Oh shit.
Yeah.
It's like it raises the emotional stakes. Like, remember, there are emotional stakes and tangible stakes, right? Like this is hard stuff to make internally consistent, make those connections between like, okay, I plotted this thing out conceptually, but like also tying it to character in a meaningful way with choices are coming from flaw, coming from inner need, and feel earned. That's the magic trick. Because if you have all of one or all of the other dynamic, it's no one's going to give a shit.
Mm-hmm. So something that I wanted to do is to show you all a technique that you can use to help you get through Act 2, or like just help start giving you ideas for Act 2. And you might remember that we've been working on a script with Avi and Theo for a while now in here. Loose idea, it was based on the floating bodies picture that we had, super creepy, and we made a little short about it, and then now we're expanding it into a feature. And we've really figured out our first act. We know what the deal is, and then we now know the end. We know what ultimate test we want to get to, and we know how the final fight's going to go down, blah 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 blah, for the most part. And now we're sitting here trying to figure out Act 2. And that's a lot of times, to a degree, how it goes. You, based on their flaw and stuff, you kind of know where they have to end up. But now what do you do? If you're at this point, what do you do? And I would say the first question is looking at your ultimate test and deciding, could this be my midpoint? And, just considering it for a second. But here is something that I want to show you called a story circle.
Hey.
Look at my whiteboard. This is how come my mouse was messed up. Let's see if I can actually use it. So the idea of a story circle is, or a story clock, is that this circle, think of it like a clock, represents the entirety of your movie, right? So this is where we start and end. I'll put a little star. How about that? I'm not
Although
good
you
at
could
that.
also, there are some people who think of it as different acts. Like there are different ways to think. Like this is a very flexible tool. You can. There are some people who think you can use a story circle in a scene. Just
Yeah, you
interesting.
can.
Just different ways of thinking about it. It's a
Yep.
flexible tool.
This one I'm using kind of to help us navigate through the ultimate, or I was gonna say ultimate test. No, mostly Act 2, right? So if this is 120 pages, then this is page 60, 30, 90. It's a long movie, but whatever. We are James Cameron today.
Also,
Um,
these don't have to be clear like the same amount of time. You could have the beats of the first 3 beats happen in 5 pages. Like you can do all sorts of stuff. It's really
you
just more
can,
about yeah,
but this part I'm just mapping out where the numbers
for
are,
sure, for
just so
sure.
you know. So what you do with something like this is you start kind of thinking about where things happen in your movie. So our inciting incident, if I remember right, is that her girlfriend never comes home, right? She goes to this, they loosely, for people who aren't familiar with it, the idea is that there's two women, um, and their girlfriends, and one girlfriend takes a job on this farm and never comes home, and now the other girlfriend has to try to investigate and figure out what's going on. And it's got this whole creepy deepy thing with sky gods and this farmer sacrificing people, and they're all like hovering in the air. But anyway, that's the loose idea, right? Is that the girlfriend goes missing, and that's what really kicks off our protagonist into action. Our protagonist is Max, girlfriend's Nellie. So I would say at about page 10, 20, we have our inciting incident for her. Right? Right about there. We have Nellie never comes home. Nellie is gone. And then a little bit later, we have our call to action, where now Max learns that she shares a cloud account with Nellie, and she got some creepy pictures Nellie took before she disappeared coming in on the cloud, and the pictures are very ominous and something is clearly off. And now we know that Nellie is officially missing. It's not just that Nellie left, Nellie is officially missing, and it seems bad. So that is our call to action, and that would probably be around page, uh, you know, 20. I think that makes
Yeah,
sense.
I mean you could sort of say it's the same beat as say page 30, but
Yeah, somewhere in here, right? Um,
you could also say that those 2 beats are very similar. She's gone and she's missing.
no, because I guess this is where like the relationship dynamic comes in, because the idea was that at first she thinks that Nellie just left her and that it was a breakup, and so
Gotcha.
it seems
Gotcha.
plausible.
And then
Yeah.
she finds she's missing, and then page 30 she'll go and get her.
Mm-hmm. So then the thing that we know is that the new world is that Nellie is missing. That's the new dynamic that Max is going to have to try to resolve. We know who our antagonist is. It's the farmer who owns the farm that Nellie went to work for, and we're thinking the midpoint is that she gets stuck on the farm with no way out. So now she's stuck on the farm, which is interesting. Um, let's see. Anyway, I'm just going to explain how this works. So, with a story circle, what's so nice about it is that things that are across from each other on the circle tend to be related. If you map out stories, a lot of times this is how it goes. This is not a hard. This is definitely just a tool. This is not prescriptive again, but it's just something that tends to happen. And when you know that it tends to happen, it can help give you ideas for how to get through. So, for example, if we find out that Nellie is officially missing right here on page 20, then maybe directly across the story circle at a page like 75 or something like that, maybe we now know where Nellie is. We now have located Nellie and know that she's in major, major jeopardy. She's floating in the air. Something like that. And you can do this with a bunch of beats. So like every beat that you have. So we know that over here at the ultimate test, she basically sacrifices herself to go into the sky. Max does. She trades herself. She trades herself for her girlfriend, right? So maybe across the story circle at about page like 45, 50, something like that, maybe we have her first see the device that is making people float. Like maybe this is like where she learns that all the bodies are floating and then now she's going to be floating. Something like that, where she understands the situation over here. Anyway, I don't want to spend too terribly long on this, but I just wanted to share this tool with you because it's been really helpful to me and I know it's helpful to some people. Basically, the way you use it, draw a circle, map out loose page counts just to give yourself somewhere to start from. Put the beats that you do know, and then think about what's completely opposite. Maybe when they think that Nellie's gone because they had a fight, maybe this is where she finds out that she finds, here, this is interesting, a ring in Nellie's things that she left behind. Nellie was actually going to propose, things like that.
I like that.
Yeah. So it can help you think about, okay, how could I build this? How can things change? And again, sometimes it's things that are totally opposite. So at first they're fighting. Max thinks that Nellie's going to dump her. And then across the circle, she finds the ring and learns that Nellie was really going to propose. And that was the big plan, right? And that is very dramatic and interesting. Sometimes it's set up payoff, like with the sacrifice thing where they're floating. Over here, she sees that people are floating and she kind of like understands the mechanics of how it happens. And then over here, she's actually going up to be floated in the sky. So it's either set up payoff or opposites. It just gives you something to start from and to help start brainstorming some ideas. I really like the ring. That's sad. Rip.
Oh, I like it too. I think it's a good beat.
Oh, that's cool. Notepad similarities between this one, our I didn't look story, or between our hypothetical babysitter thing.
No, the don't look up.
Oh no!
Yeah, we've already, Alexie, we already had this conversation.
I know. I haven't seen it yet, so it's not like locked in my brain.
Gotcha.
I don't quite understand, but that's okay. You know what? We did our best. Did our bestest. It's my curse.
It's common. Don't worry.
It's my curse. But yeah, I think that that's a pretty thorough.
It's a lot of meat for people to chew on.
Yeah.
This is hard stuff, like it's because if you move something just like the story clock revealed, you move something here, it changes something else, right? That's to make a movie is a collection of 100 to hundreds of ideas that all are internally consistent. And to actually achieve that end result takes a lot of building, tweaking, looking at the story from this point of view, looking at it from this point of view, changing it, real thought. That's why you have multiple drafts. That's why it's really helpful to think things through on a conceptual level, because, there's a lot going on.
Before we go, do you want to talk a little bit about your snowballing technique as another way to get ideas?
So if this approach is a very architect centric, like design, you know, point of view. Mine is far more stream of consciousness, and I recommend doing both. Snowballing is basically an exercise where you take a blank piece of paper, maybe 30 minutes, like put yourself on a timer, and force yourself to write every single thing that happens in chronological order from memory in your story and get to the end. And then once you get to the end, immediately go to another blank piece of paper and do it a second time, learning from what you've just done before. And the idea is you're going to, this is great if you just have like a rough outline and you're coming up with ideas to connect them and sort of actually think through the motivated logic of you are telling the story to yourself. So it's kind of like the equivalent of telling the story orally to yourself or telling the story orally to somebody else. Like you're writing all the things that happen in sequence as they would be seen by an audience. And you're going to surprise yourself. There's going to be things that are different. There's going to be different tones. Sometimes you have lines of dialogue. It's supposed to be very messy and it's supposed to happen very fast. Like don't spend a day on a snowball exercise. Like force yourself to do it in an hour, 30 minutes. And the idea of doing it immediately after you've done it, and it's just you're re-entrenching, you're re-solidifying your things that don't work will manifest themselves as not working. It'll feel bad, right? And the things that do work will spark other ideas. And by the time you get to the end of maybe doing that a few times, you will have a lot more story ideas, or at least a lot more connected accumulation of events than you would otherwise. And I think that's a good time to do the story clock.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. So because I'm someone who needs things very, very like specifically laid out, I will tell you the answers to the questions that I have asked Adam, which is that you are not literally telling the story from beginning to end in 30 minutes. So if I was working with our script, for example, and I was doing a snowball, I might do like, all right, so I know that they're girlfriends. I know that Nellie just got out of prison and they're both having a hard time finding jobs. I might just say, all right, first dash, Max Nellie got an apartment looking for jobs. It was another failure, blah, 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 blah. Then the next one, like I loosely know that eventually Nellie's going to find an opportunity for a job outside of town. So like we're with Nellie. Nellie walks past like a help wanted poster and goes, huh, and takes the little tick thing, the little paper. Then what could happen next? I know that we got to get to the farm. We got to get Nellie to the farm. So let's say that they say goodbye. They have a big fight. They have a big fight about something stupid. It was coffee and blah, blah, blah. So you see how I'm just kind of like, I'm literally just making things up like you would do in a first draft, but much faster because I'm not writing the real scenes. I'm just saying, okay, this is how it could be. This is how it could connect. I know where I'm going. What is the fastest way that I can connect what I know to the next thing that I remember? And that's how you go through it. It's a speed draft. And I hope that helps because I was like, for the longest time, I was like, Adam, why are you just like rewriting your tentpole but not looking at it? And then I finally asked.
Well, it's the way I think of it is you're telling the story, and honestly, you're practicing for pitching.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and I'm a big believer that you should be really good at just telling your story orally, because every time you do, you're less likely to repeat things that don't work every time you do it. Right. Because if you're looking at people and you see their eyes light up or you see their eyes glaze over, like, you know what's working, what's not working. You know your story's boring if people kind of are not enjoying the experience of you telling them the story. And doing, it's a little different than tempo leagues. I don't even think of it as bullets. I'm like, it's like, what's like the 5-page short story version of this? I'm like telling the story. Like if she did this, then what you like, and I would like give character reactions. She feels distrustful, like, oh, what happens? Like what do they say? Maybe like, I even put lines of dialogue in it when they come to me.
Another option instead of writing it, if you are someone who likes to do it aloud, is to do it aloud and record yourself.
Yeah.
As a helpful hint, don't snowball to somebody else yet, because if you're just telling them the story over and over, they're going to stop listening for things that are different, and they're not going to be able to give you an honest
When you
answer
tell
about it later.
somebody the story, a lot should change possibly between versions, but like you want it to be somebody who's never heard it before, because they can know. And just reading, like, are they bored? Are they interested? I don't know. And maybe I have a lot of people in my life who who are okay with me telling them shit like this. So that's a luxury I have.
Well,
Anyway.
you can also come to our Discord and find somebody there to talk to us. Let me include the link. Okay, and I think that's it for today. We will see you next week. And I think Avi will be back with us, hopefully. So
sounds good.
See you then.